This episode of A Small Good Thing is different in some ways. One way it's different is because it's longer and a little less structured. Another way it's different is because my guests, Andrew Cochran and Ryan Sarehkhani, who have their own podcast called Seated in Action, they're different. That is to say, they're different from me. They are more liberal or libertarian in Andrew's case, and I'm more conservative. They're secular, and I'm a Christian. And they're different from me in one other significant way. They're young men, and I'm, well, not young. But while we're different in many ways, we're similar in many others. We all went to the same college together and had many of the same teachers and courses, so we have shared formative experiences. What's more, all three of us are now teaching at various colleges as adjunct professors. Consequently, we all have an interest in what's going on college campuses around America today, and that's what we talked about a few weeks ago. Not surprisingly, we have both different and similar views on that. For the sake of continuity and pacing, I've edited our 2-hour conversation to about an hour and 15 minutes. I hope you'll hear some small good thing.
You're listening to a small good thing.
You're listening to a small
good thing.
Good thing.
Small good thing with Steve Zell.
With Steve Zell.
Andrew Cochran and Ryan Sarehkhani from their podcast, Seated in Action. And the reason I wanted to have you on the show is just to say thank you. I wanted to say thank you publicly so all my listeners heard it, because I would still be halfway in the weeds if it weren't for you guys giving me some shortcuts to how to do this thing. So I want to say...
Pleasure is ours.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean it. Thanks so much. I just wanted to have you on the show to give you guys a little bit of a chance just to tell my listeners about your podcast. And that's a good thing for you. And also just to kind of be a good neighbor. One of my goals is just that, is to be a good neighbor to people who maybe don't think like I think, and that's okay. And I know you guys are politicos. I'm not. So I just thought I'll have you guys on and you talk. You tell us what's going on, and I'd love to hear that. Just before we go a little bit further, the link that ties us together is our college days, as it were. Yeah. And we all went to, for the record, Cal Poly Pomona, and I did 2 years there in the undergraduate program. I went back to school very, very, very late, and then I did 2 years in the grad program. So I was there 4 years. I had a wonderful, wonderful experience, and during that time, I met you guys, and our paths have crossed, and it's a strange world. Here we are talking again 5 years later, and I just think that's kind of nice.
Yeah, and in 3 different states.
In 3 different states.
And
good.
And soon to be 2 different countries.
Yeah.
Excellent. Am I right? We're all teachers. We're all college teachers. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct with an asterisk.
And what's the asterisk for you?
So I was teaching at San Diego Miramar College and Marine Corps Air Station in San Diego, but that has come to an end because my wife just got into a PhD program at University of Wisconsin Milwaukee, and so I have I've relocated, and I am not working within academia anymore. I've switched industries, and I'll leave it at that.
So okay, I won't go much further other than to say, are you happy with this new industry, or would you rather get back into the old gig?
Too soon to tell. I mean, I'll always love teaching.
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun, especially when you have a lot of control over your curriculum. Mm-hmm. And I'll have to say more about that when we start talking about today's topic. Mm-hmm. But it's not necessarily the most sustainable profession in the world, to put it lightly.
Teaching?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right about
adjuncting.
that. Yeah, you're right about that.
Increasingly more competition for the very few tenured spots that pop up every couple years.
The fewer, because they just keep hiring more adjuncts.
Yep, hired guns.
Yeah. So You asked us to introduce the podcast, and one of the things that I wanted to introduce about the podcast was actually, almost all the episodes do cover a political topic, and it's funny because, Andrew, I don't think that's what we set out to do. We mostly wanted the podcast to be about conversations and facilitating things, but we're just both such sad people that's the only thing we ever tend to talk about is politics.
Well, I think that what we really want is people to look at the political landscape through a more, I don't want to say realistic lens, but realistic lens. I think that there's so much sensationalism. In fact, the episode that's dropping on Monday is about sensationalism and clickbait and how, incendiary titles can fundamentally change the way that we interface with whatever it is we're reading or listening to. And so we really want people to be a bit more disconnected. Well, not disconnected, but perhaps detached from the sensationalism, a bit more mindful, so that we can actually see the political landscape for what it is rather than what we, are projecting onto it. And, looking at the real world through a sober, mindset. It's a difficult task, but it's an imperative one. And so I think that we've kind of departed from the rhetorical dimension of our initial mission statement / set of goals. But in doing so, I think that we've kind of towed the line between, talking about things that are what we feel are super important, but also always tying that to some sort of practicum. And I think we actually did that really well in this last episode.
Plug.
Yeah. Shameless plug.
No, great. I'm hoping that people will give you a listen. So back up one half a step. What was the impetus? You guys were sitting around and you said, we ought to do a podcast. What was the motivator behind that?
I'll explain it from my end, and if you have a different story, you can give that one.
All right.
When I'm not working on a project, I get absolute cabin fever, and I go absolutely nuts. And Andrew and I have worked on a lot of projects in the past. We're kind of project buddies in that we kind of always go to each other first to get anything going. And we figured a lot of the stuff that we're interested in, we have conversations about anyway. Yeah. And so it's a good way to contribute to a positive discourse, in my opinion. Keeps me busy off the streets, It's a way to do something with the conversations I'm having with Andrew anyway. And it's good. It's a good way to stay connected too, quite honestly, especially when there's so much geography between people. Using mediums like this is helpful and meaningful. So,
Andrew, would you want to add any more to why? What was the impetus for you for putting the show on?
No, it's pretty much the same. Ryan and I have worked on, I think at the very least 3 long-term projects, i.e. projects that
span a few years each.
Yeah, a few years each. Yeah, a few years each. And, I think that the last project that kind of fell apart, it was a tough one. We had invested, I think, more of our energy, more of our just intellect into that. And it was super draining. And when it fell through, because of actually the team that we were trying to put together, it was really deflating. And I think the span of time between that and putting together the podcast was the longest that we had worked on a project or hadn't worked on a project together. And
it was like 2 years, I think, we didn't do anything.
Yeah, and it was compounded by the fact that after grad school, I'd moved down to San Diego, and so I wasn't seeing Ryan more than 2 times a year, maybe.
Yeah.
So yeah, we just got on the phone and really tried to conceptualize what kind of project we could do from at that time. It wasn't even across the state. It was a span of 100 miles, but now it's really, what can we do when I'm 2,000 miles away? And this just seemed to work the best.
Yeah.
And so this is project number 4. Now we have at least 2 more years.
Yep.
Ryan, you have alluded to the fact that you'll be leaving the country. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I'm actually signing the contract today, so let's hope that goes through. I'm going to be moving out to a nice city in China called Suzhou, and I'm going to be moving out there with my wife. I got a job at a nice school, and that was primarily, I was galvanized by the fact of the stuff that we were talking about earlier, where I just simply cannot make a living as an adjunct out here. Yeah. And if I can make a living, it's not the kind of living that I want to make, commuting between 3 campuses and not having any job security at the end of every year. Yeah. So I'm just going to channel my talents elsewhere.
What's the China connection, if I can ask?
Well, there's a few things. There was a program run through Cal Poly, actually, that would send teachers to China to teach summer school. And that's my first experience teaching. So my grounding in teaching actually is in ESL and EFL.
And you have to tell us what ESL is. Because
English second language or English foreign language.
Got it.
And so all that experience was really what got me teaching into the college system, because that got me my experience, and so it was a whole lot easier to get a job. But the thing is, China in particular, not only do I have experience with it, they pay a ton of money to teachers, and they respect their teachers out there. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, there are a few places that'll pay, like I understand Dubai pays very well. As well. Yeah, I think everything out there has to pay well if you want to live out there.
I think.
Yeah. But yeah, as far as English teaching goes, China's kind of like the place to be right now, because they're actively pushing forward to be a more globalized community. They want to start participating in global business to a higher degree than they are now, and that involves English education.
I noticed one thing that I like a lot is you guys have, I don't know if it's the correct word to say, you have an international flavor. So you are sometimes reviewing films, Chinese, Taiwanese films. I don't know if you've hit the Japanese. I think
not yet, but I'm sure we will, because I think we both love Japanese film.
Yeah, there's a film from a director named Obayashi called Hausu. It was produced in 1977, and currently that's my 4th favorite film of all time.
Really?
And boy, I cannot wait to do an episode about Hausu. There's this running joke in the podcast where I'm going to start a separate podcast where I watch Hausu every day for a year, and podcast every single day about my experience with it. At this point, I'm not sure if it's a joke or a pipe dream or both, but maybe one of these days. But to answer your original question, same as Ryan. My first teaching experience was back in 2010 in China, and my second teaching experience was in China in 2011. And basically, that's what got me into grad school. I taught out there 3 times. And then 3 times, and then once in Taiwan. And it was in 2013 that I taught at the university level for the first time. And that was also in China. So Ryan and I have a deep love and appreciation for China.
I mentioned to you guys that I wanted to talk about possibly, and I'm not married to the topic. We can go whichever way we want. But I thought maybe we might talk about heterodoxy. Now, that's another big word that we're going to have to kind of suss out a little bit so that people can track with us. Heterodoxy, and please correct me and modify me where I need to be modified, because I hear these as kind of rumors in the wind. My best sense of it is heterodoxy is in the conversation now about what's going on at the college level in schools in America mostly. And heterodoxy, obviously, is the opposite of orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is the idea that it literally means this is the right way to think, orthodoxy. And if I've got it correctly, the complaint seems to be now that American colleges, universities, have become orthodox. They have a unidimensional narrative. It is political correctness. And I don't think I want to attack political correctness. That's not my goal. But the idea is that American universities are, in some sense or another, promoting, projecting. The serious word is indoctrinating. I'm not so sure about that. But basically presenting an orthodox view about any number of different things, political things, cultural things, moral things, you name it. That what we need to, if get back is the right word, we need to somehow or another get back to heterodoxy, which is the idea that all kinds of views and all kinds of thoughts should be openly embraced, entertained, and to some degree presented so that the playing field becomes a little bit more, and these are bad metaphors, level. Do I have that right? Would you guys fix me? What do I need to know?
Yeah. So I think to put it into a soundbite, the desire to re-inject heterodoxy into the academy is simply to ensure that departments within the collegiate systems have various viewpoints, so viewpoint diversity within the departments, because no individual viewpoint is enough, especially in the softer disciplines. No one viewpoint is enough to, find the answer in and of themselves, because everybody has, confirmation biases. Everybody has blind spots. What's the best way to say this? Like every epistemic methodology towards truth finding has some sort of shortcoming.
Okay, so big words. What's epistemic? Epistemic. What are you saying?
The methodology by which somebody attempts to uncover a truth about the world or about people or whatever the subject matter happens to be. There are methodological shortcomings that are tied to ideology or to just like the way that you look at the world. And so, if you want a fuller description of what the world is like or what a social phenomenon is like, it is best to see, or to first put a bunch of people who think differently into a room, observe the same phenomenon, and see where all of the overlap is. Because where there's a ton of overlap, that is a greater indicator of being, closer to the truth than if everybody just says, this is the truth, this is the truth, this is the truth. And they're all from the same, they're starting from the same position. It's just not adequate. And so what Jonathan Haidt is doing with the Heterodox Academy is he's making kind of an organization where people are registering to, say like, I'm a libertarian in this kind of department. And, I'd like to see more people who think this way because an overwhelming majority of people in X, Y, or Z discipline happen to be progressive Democrats. And it's often political. It's not necessarily, again, an epistemic issue, i.e. theory of knowledge stuff. It is usually political because, kind of make a connection to what you said earlier. It seems to me that, to quote Andrew Breitbart, actually, politics are downstream of culture. But it seems in this day and age, paper findings seem to be downstream of politics. So if that's the case, then it would be appropriate to ensure that the department is more diversified in viewpoint rather than, well, not rather than other measures of diversity, but those should be included as well.
Do you guys think the charge or the claim is true? Do you think the American Academy, I'll let you define that how you wish, do you think the Academy now has in the past become severely orthodox and that heterodoxy is needed?
I'll say something about that. When we have conversations like this, it's really difficult to talk terms because we have a tendency to project modern day politics onto whatever we're seeing. And this is one of the ways that I get really frustrated with politics, and in the way that I imagine you're frustrated a lot, where you just think, man, it's just not worth it at all. When we project these kinds of things, and you're right, what you said was there's this idea that we want to go back to a heterodoxy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
if that's the right way of saying it, I'm
no.
Yeah.
I completely agree with your use of terms here. But I would argue that the prevailing idea that we need to do this is false, only because never in the history of education have we had heterodoxy. Mm-hmm. It's always been orthodoxy. And this idea that there was a time in history where it wasn't is fantasy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that the lefties have tried to do in a campus is bring in more diverse voices. So when we talk about literature now, we're not only talking about Greek, British, and American literature. There is a whole world and times that people are trying to bring into the canon. They say, look, we want heterodox. We want to change what we think literature is. And generally the people who they get kickback from are the conservatives who are saying they want heterodoxy. And again, I'm not trying to flatten the discourse here, because these liberal conservative labels aren't necessarily helpful a lot of the time. So to answer your question more directly, do I think we've moved towards orthodoxy? Yeah, I think that I think this is statistically proven that most people who work in academia are left-leaning, either a little bit or far left. But what it means to be liberal and lefty is such a massive undertaking that it's really a collection of separate ideologies. It's not really an ideology within itself. So in some respects, the left has pushed heterodoxy forward, but it's been at the cost of things like the traditional canon, or if some people might want to accuse them of socialist economics, which I haven't seen personally, but I have heard people talking about. In a previous episode, I've talked about in economics class, we don't even call it capitalist economics. It's just called economics, because that's our default understanding of what economics are. Every other type of economics is just that, othered, right? Because we start from this point of capitalist orthodoxy.
Yeah, and I take your point. If I hear you correctly, it's what you're saying is, well, it's always been orthodoxy. Orthodoxy just keeps changing. And so 50 years ago, what we would call the Western canon, and I won't get you started on the idea of Western, but the Western canon was the Orthodox view. And then things changed. And now, in a certain sense, if I'm hearing you correctly, the current orthodoxy has displaced the old orthodoxy, and the old orthodoxy doesn't like that.
Yeah, that's kind of how I view it. And that's not to speak to the merits of the new orthodoxy. I'm not necessarily saying that's good and better than the old one, but a lot of the animosity I see, I think, really has to do with the conflict and friction caused by this change.
What do you think, Andrew?
So I want to speak to one of the things that Ryan said. So when he says that a lot, academia to a large extent has always been this orthodox place of learning where a lot of like-minded individuals congregate to do a thing. I think that is borne out kind of in the psychology. And to always bring it back to JP, he says something to the effect of individuals who are predisposed to lean to the left often exhibit characteristics that indicate that they're high in openness to new ideas and aesthetics, and that that's a manifestation, or it's manifested as the quintessential liberal or lefty. And so it's no surprise that a place that's all about the exploration of ideas and aesthetics is going to attract that kind of person. So obviously the academy is going to kind of have an undercurrent of orthodoxy because of the people it fundamentally attracts. But I also want to kind of complicate this a bit further by saying that when people kind of colloquially talk about viewpoint diversity within the academy, the social science does bear out that, yes, social sciences, liberal arts, and the humanities at large are becoming increasingly leftist, not just liberal. That's an undisputable fact. But the way that manifests within the departments and the way that kind of their forms of thought kind of permeate the department, I think really it's very different at different levels. So when people think of these postmodern neo-Marxists, as our friend JP likes to say, they're running programs at elite universities. This is happening at Yale. This is happening at Evergreen, which is not necessarily elite, but it's certainly an experimental college. It's happening at Oberlin, but these things have been happening for at least 40 years. It's not really happening at Cal Poly Pomona. It's not really happening at San Diego Miramar College. It's not really happening even at some of the R1 universities that aren't necessarily top tier. So
can I add to that point?
Go ahead.
I think people would be really surprised at the viewpoints that students give coming from community college levels, particularly from working areas. Because what I find is one of the most difficult things isn't providing students with new information. That's okay. They'll usually change their minds if they don't know about something and I teach them. But it's really hard to change their minds about things. But they're coming with all of these, a lot of conservative thoughts are coming in, particularly within the working class. And I don't think that a lot of teachers really try to upend that. I think most teachers have the integrity to let their students have their own thoughts, and they actually enjoy the conversations in class when we get to hear them interact.
All right, well, now I have to push back against you.
That's fine, because I'm done.
Because Claire, she's going through her orientation and training, and she told me that one of the people who is being primed to teach this intro to research class seriously said, in all earnestness, well, what if one of my students is conservative?
No.
Right. Right. That's
yeah. So I mean, we can't minimize the problem by saying it doesn't exist, because there are hyper liberal, especially kind of in the millennial generation who's coming into the professoriate. There is an aversion to especially social conservatism, not necessarily not necessarily tied to economics, though.
Can I ask something about that, though?
Oh yeah, sure.
What level is she teaching?
She's teaching undergrad.
Undergrad at a university?
Yeah, at a R1 university. Yeah.
Okay, because I was making a point about community colleges.
Yeah, sure, but well, I don't want to throw any names out because
okay.
Go on.
Though. Go
colleagues
on.
and whatnot.
So I'm going to give you a narrative that's some of my listeners will immediately recognize, and you may recognize it as well or intuit it in any event. So I hail from a religious tribe, and I think you guys, I think you're non-religious. I don't know if you're anti-religious. That's fine with me. But I come from a religious tribe. Those are the folks I know. That's where I came from. And it is no secret that there are some folks in that tribe who are not going to and do not want to send their kids to a public state university. They're not going to do it. And they're not going to do it because they feel it's in some sense harmful to their kids. Now, some of this, I think, is overprotectiveness. But the idea is that their kids are going to go there, and I don't think they think, well, maybe they do. They're going to be taught wrong things. And that somehow or another, these kids are going to be vulnerable. Or maybe, let me rephrase it. Let me think about this a little bit more carefully. I'm not even sure it's that. I think that they think, I don't know. I'm just making it up as I go along. I think that they think or believe or feel that what their kids believe will be disparaged, dismissed, marginalized. I think for some religious folks, the idea is that the state universities basically send this message. Well, if you're really an educated person, you would not be a religious person. That's just foolishness. Religious people live in a benighted, backwards kind of mentality, and real educated people like us here don't believe in that sort of.
I mean, I completely, I understand it. If for example, if I go for a career in China, and I decide to raise a kid there, I want to put them through the public school system. Would I be worried about what they were learning in school? Absolutely. Yeah. There would be lots of things, especially if the curriculum's coming from the Communist Party, right, that would worry me, right? And I would also go as far as to validate some of their fears, because the idea that more educated people don't believe in God has statistical merit. It's more. I think you told me about this, Andrew. I think you said that atheists are the single most educated demographic in the world. They have. It's something go on.
That might be after Jews or Hindus.
Oh, that complicates things, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but I think you might be right though.
It was something like the average atheist has at least 1 degree. Mm-hmm. There's certainly a connection here between atheism and education, right? And
there is, and I can add, and I can tell you too, even though this number's changing, I know it's true for 10 years ago. The evangelical tribe, the conservative, so the conservative Christian tribe, they have as a group have fewer college degrees conferred on that group. That number is changing. Let me give you a different story and see if I can come at it this way. See what you make of this. And it has to do with this heterodoxy and my own experience. So let me make clear here to everybody who's listening. I went to Cal Poly. I loved the place. I am grateful for my teachers. I learned so much. I wish I could sit in their classes again, because there were so many things now. I think, oh man, I missed that whole thing. I would go back and listen to them. And it was a wonderful experience. And I went in as a believer, but I went in much older. And so I had a great education there. And I never, ever got the feeling that some sort of political or otherwise, some kind of orthodoxy was being foisted on me. I never had any kind of nudging or, implication that I should that this kind of paper would be off, wouldn't be appropriate, that wouldn't be really educated. I never had that. I was exploring. I wanted to see what the academy was doing with religion, and that was a thing to me. And all my teachers, nobody discouraged me. Zero. So I had a good experience. But let me just kind of say how I think some religious people will view orthodoxy, if that's the right word, I'm not sure it is, in the academy. So let me just give you here's an example. So I'm sitting in a class, and I don't know, for all I know, Ryan, you might have been sitting in a class. And I think I was a split track. I was half lit and half rhetoric.
That was my track as well.
Yeah. So I'm taking a class, and the class project is to make some sort of rhetorical comment about the late Justice Scalia's, the opinion. He writes the court opinion for the Second Amendment, and that was a big deal. And everybody had to talk about that. So I talked about it, and then during my presentation, I mentioned, and I don't think it was my idea, I think I read it someplace, but I mentioned in Scalia's opinion that he very closely makes an argument for natural law. And first of all, I don't think anybody in the room would know what natural law is, but I explained to him what natural law is, and that is there is a principle in the universe that is natural. We see it. We have it. We intuit right and wrong. And there are many people who think that. Anyways, I made this comment, and then somehow or another, I was leaving a lot of room for somebody to say something, and when I was talking about I forget the specifics, but somebody just basically mentioned God, and I think they correctly inferred what I was saying, and that is that Scalia was in some sense saying there is a natural law about the right to protect somebody, and you might have to kill somebody with a gun, and I'm really doing this badly too. But they mentioned something about God, and the whole room just goes really dead. It's really quiet. It's that kind of quiet where oh gosh, they said God. And it was like nobody in the room knew what to do with that. And so I didn't say anything about it. I just said correct. And I can remember this day. And it was well received, and other people had things. And so I was leaving. And I had two people come up to me. They were part of the class. And they said to me, "I wish you were our professor." Now, no, that's silly. That's just silly. Because the professor that we had in that class knows in his little fingernail what I know in both my hands. And they didn't really mean that they wished me to be their professor. What they meant is that I acknowledged them. I was aware and was not afraid to talk about God as an actual discussional point on the table that had validity. And I had this several times that would happen to me. And so here's where I'm going with it. I'm doing a lot of talking on this point. Let me say it to you a different way, and I'll see how you guys feel about this. Somebody said this, censorship is bad. And we all believe that. Who doesn't believe that? And it's bad. It would be bad if any student anywhere felt censored, right? We all agree with that. But this person, I forget who said it, they said, but there's something even more diabolical. And that is when a person, a student or any other person, has been implicitly censored for so long that when they go into certain environments, now they censor themselves. They're afraid to speak. And this person was saying self-censorship is more pernicious, far more pernicious than censorship. And so what I would say, I'll just put this forward, and you tell me what you think. I have strong anecdotal evidence that many religious people now are censoring themselves. They're self-censoring. And they do it for a variety of reasons. They've been taught K through 12 that religious ideas are just silliness, and it's really not an educated person and has no place in the classroom. and that they're really just sort of dumb people. They believe silly, stupid things. And so what they've done now, they've been censored, not aggressively, not explicitly, but by all kinds of other kinds of implicit systemic ways. And so now they get into college, they just don't say anything. They don't say anything at all. They're censoring themselves. I think what I'm saying has some merit. Do you think so? Do you agree with that?
Well, it's complicated because I don't doubt that, especially in this cultural moment, that is a growing phenomenon. But on the other hand, if I'm not mistaken, with the last Gallup poll or whatever religious poll it was, like 72% of the U.S. populace is some sort of denomination of Christian. And I think only somewhere between 10 and 15% of the populace is irreligious, and that's certainly growing. And like you were saying, I think that those who consider themselves to be irreligious tend to go to universities at a disproportionately high rate. I guess that the only thing that I would say is that I can understand why people who are going to college kind of want to partition that which they deem theological and that which they deem, naturalistic or whatever. And I don't think that partition is necessary. And I don't think that people should necessarily have to shield their beliefs. That's
not my question to you. It's not that they should. Yeah. It's are they doing
is
that?
It happening? Well, yeah.
And if it is happening, why is that?
And anecdotally, it's certainly happening, and I think it's happening because people want to partition, naturalistic truth from theological truth, and for good reason in some areas of discourse. E.g., evolution, which is the backbone of biology as a discipline. I guess another example could be, deep cosmology, something like, geoscience, where we're looking at carbon dating methodologies. I think that there's an unhealthy relationship between some branches of theology and some branches of science, and that people who dedicate their lives to advancing those sciences feel as though they have to take theology out of the equation as much as they can. So it's for sure happening, and I can definitely understand it, but I don't think that the balance is that delicate, and I think that there should be less of that, simply because there are many religious scientists. In fact, I think a majority of scientists are religious rather.
I want to add some stuff, and I think it's going to validate a lot of what you just said, and I also think it's going to complicate it. So your anecdotal evidence about religious people not feeling that they're able to express themselves in their class and they're self-censoring, I completely agree with that. I could see that happening. I've seen it happen with my own students who I know are religious. You said that when it comes up in class, the class and the teacher don't know what to do with it. And that's right. If one of my students did it, I wouldn't necessarily know where to take the conversation from there. I don't think self-censorship is more insidious than actual censorship, because self-censorship has to do with feelings, and feelings can be wrong. They don't always line up with reality. And something that I'd really like to get your read on.
Fair enough, but that doesn't mean they're not real. Powerful.
Right. Correct. It doesn't mean they're not real, and I completely agree that they are feeling them, and it is affecting their performance in school. But what I would like to ask you, actually, is, because this is a belief that I have, is that particularly the Christian community has a martyr complex. and they generally like the narrative of sacrifice and going through hardships for their faith because it is so central to the faith. That is the moment that Christianity becomes Christianity, is the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. But what I see is, I often see complaints that religion is constantly being attacked in the country, not just necessarily academia. I see the same arguments that white people are being attacked in this country all the time. When the fact of the matter is that white Christians hold all of the governmental power in this country, and their feeling that they're under attack doesn't add up with reality. Now, I do think I just conceded the fact that I wouldn't know what to do in a situation where you know, God would be brought up in an academic conversation. Right. But I also think that there's a lot of projection coming from the Christian community, kind of realizing that maybe they're not the head honchos anymore. Yes. But it comes down to an even deeper philosophical question, which is, what is the college system for, and what does it claim to do? So a critical thinking class, which I often teach, I teach one of Carl Sagan's book, and we talk about debunking pseudoscience and what could be happening. You know, let's debunk astrology. And I ask students, you know, what are some things that might make astrology valid? What are some things that might make it invalid? And how can we find out? If somebody were to suggest to me that astrology actually is real because God created the universe with order in it, and the formation of the stars does in fact coincide with his plan and does affect our personalities, that to me seems like an intellectual dead end. And I'm not saying that's like, oh, that's the most complex religious argument that I've heard, but it's also not the worst that I've ever heard. If you want to respond to anything that I just said, I'm kind of wondering.
No, I would. My only comment to you would be right. So you know the old saying, nobody hits my brother unless it's me. So so I can tend to be a little bit hard on my own tribe. So yes, I tend to think you're probably right. I do hear some. They're not going to like me, but some whining going on with a lot of Christians. And I'm thinking, no, man, you're not under, you know, you're not getting killed here, man. And you don't have to construe everything as an attack on Christianity. And I see that. I'm with you on that. So I can agree with that. But I'm holding the Wall Street Journal in my hand right now. What is this? Tuesday, September 4th. Here's a guy named David Galertner. He teaches at Yale. And it's an op-ed thing. 10 things they didn't tell you at freshman orientation. He's not speaking as the mouthpiece for Yale. He's speaking as a guy who works there. He's a professor of computer science at Yale and chief scientist at DITAC LLC, whatever that is. Okay, it's got 10 things. Number 1, understand you're here to learn how to be a good citizen of the United States. So okay. Number 2, you're now a part owner of Western civilization. Yeah. Great. Number 3, now that you are college students, learn skills. Learn everything else can wait. Learning science, math, skills. And the last one, you know, we love this one. Master at least one foreign language completely. Reading and writing English are the most important skills of all. I'm on board with that. Number 4, listen skeptically. Right? Number 5, remember that a professor has no business mentioning his personal politics in class, ever. That's his opinion. He goes on. He's got other ones.
That's an opinion I agree with, actually.
Okay. Number 7, if you want to be educated, you can't skip the hard subjects. Number 8, Andrew, you must know the Bible and Shakespeare. This is a guy saying it. Number 9, don't expect to be guided in your social life by the behavior of older students. Number 10, relax. You and your fellow students and your professors already agree about nearly everything, and it's ironic because at the end basically he says, no, you don't agree with anything. That's what college is for. But here's where I'm going with this. Number 6. I'm just reading it out of the paper, Ryan. Number 6, there are only 2 oppressed minority groups on campuses today. practicing Jews and Christians. They are not badly oppressed, but you will hear them mentioned with a caustic disrespect that is strictly forbidden with respect to all other groups. The damage is minor. Caustic disrespect is what college is for. But if contempt for Jews and Christians is okay, any group should be fair game. You agree with that?
Do I agree that there is a minor oppression that might happen with them sharing their opinions?
No, that the only two oppressed minority groups on campus today are practicing Jews and Christians.
Oh, I mean, I'd have to imagine no.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that's true.
His reasoning on that one is because you can deny or agree with me, but I hear routinely all kinds of people everywhere make sneering remarks about religious people that they would never make about a woman or a person of color or some other group ever. They wouldn't do it. Is it big oppression? Is that the narrative I'm going with? No. That's what this guy is saying is no, this is not a big oppression. As a matter of fact, that's what you should expect.
I think it's true, but so I agree with that. Everything that you just said about comments made about religious people on campus, I think that's true. I think what we're having a conversation about is we're having an argument of value here, about to the extent, and are they the most is really the word that I'm picking up on. When I still hear students refer to trans students as it, that seems a bit more dehumanizing than making snide comments towards somebody.
I agree. I'm not going to fight you on that, of course. Yeah. I'm not saying that there aren't other groups who are making snide and terrible comments about people of color.
Yeah.
Or I'm not denying that. But what his point is, as a group, it's still, you can still go to respectable places and hear people just routinely dismiss religion. They would never do that if they were talking about a woman or gender. They would never ever do that if they were talking about some other kind of sexual group, sexual identity group. They would never do it. They'd be thrown out.
What would they dismiss about those groups?
I lost you.
Well, you said nobody would dismiss a woman or a person of color because
they would never make the kind of casual comments.
Okay, so I get what you're saying, and yeah. I think I could actually explain this. And now notice me explaining this isn't endorsing it or saying it's right.
Gotcha. Good. Yeah.
I think that the left has a fascination with power, and they generally think it's okay to punch up but not punch down. And so they'll often cite the fact that I cited earlier that there's not a single atheist member of Congress outwardly. They're all religious. Right. You can't get elected without being religious. Religious people own everything in this country. And thus saying snide remarks about these people actually doesn't really hurt them because they can just go on with their lives. Whereas you say snide comments about women or people of color or trans people, that enough. Really hurts because it has systemic power.
Fair enough.
And that's really the leftist ideology always goes back to power and systems.
So I haven't heard from you, Andrew. What do you think?
Yeah, I've been thinking deeply about how I want to tackle this because I think there's no doubt in my mind that phenomenologically speaking, Christians and Jews have a tough time.
Now, what do you mean by a tough time? Because Ryan is saying of all the people, they have the least amount of tough time. I'm not too sure I'm going with Ryan on they own all the corporations. That seems a little broad, but
now remember that was my explanation, not an endorsement.
I got you.
So when I say they feel like they're having a tough time, like Muslims don't. In some, actually, I want to be really careful. So okay. In liberal pockets of the world, Muslims don't have to be ashamed about, wearing a hijab. It's become a symbol of female empowerment, actually, from the Women's March. So you can be a loud and proud Muslim. The same is not necessarily true of Christians in a left-leaning pocket. And for some reason, there's a weird streak of anti-Semitism on the far left. So
and the far right.
and the far right. Yeah, that's where
something they could agree on.
Bedfellows. Yeah, the thing that the far right and the far left can agree on is their hatred for Jews. It's kind of true.
So it's a people problem, is what you're saying.
So yeah, like when you feel as though you're wearing a scarlet C, as it were, that you don't feel good about yourself, you don't feel good about the environment, you don't feel good about the telos, right, within the university system.
Well, explain telos. You have to explain that. Unpack that.
Purpose driven. Like you feel unmoored, like you're purposeless, because you feel as though you're being detached from your faith, or your faith is being challenged, something like that. And that's not good. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want people to have to feel that way. But correct me if I'm not mistaken. This individual is from Yale, correct?
Yes, this fellow that I was reading. He's not speaking as a mouthpiece.
Sure.
He's not doing that.
But did he use the word oppress?
Let me go back. Yes, there are only two oppressed minority groups on campuses today: practicing Jews and Christians. They're not badly oppressed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then at that point, I have to take. I think we have to go back to level 1 of stasis and define the term oppression, because I have a tough time. So let's say that there's more of a widespread phenomenon of Christians being maligned for their beliefs, and people sneer at them, and they don't really want to be their friends, or whatever it is, however that manifests. But then let's say on the other hand, there is a far rarer phenomenon of either trans individuals, getting the snot beat out of them, or people who are, like Sikhs who wear turbans, and they get they get jumped because somebody thinks that they're, a terrorist or something.
Right.
People are targeted for their race, even today. I mean, people aren't being lynched, but people.
Well, at least that we know of in America.
Can I tag something onto what you're saying here, Andrew, just really quickly?
Yeah, go for it.
Because I also wanted to say that this persecution complex that I said that Christians have, I don't think it's unique to Christianity. And I think, because this is what just reminded me of it, Andrew, I think we described on what's happening on Evergreen as a lot of people running through psychodramas. And to explain the term psychodrama, it's this scenario that you run in your head that you always think that you're under attack at all times. And that is not true, but you may feel it's true, and it affects the way that you live. So I think at these high-end universities, even coming from certain demographics who actually are oppressed, actually may be exaggerated depending on the geography. So I wanted to add that in there before you moved on. So
yeah, because I'm sure that this phenomenon happens disproportionately at high levels on the coasts. This probably isn't happening at something like, UT Knoxville, or at, well, I guess Notre Dame would be a good example, an unfair example, but an example nonetheless. This is definitely a liberal elite coastal problem.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go a little bit sideways here. Jonathan Haidt says someplace in his book, he said back in the old days, Plato and Socrates and those guys, before they would talk, they would declare, what do we call them nowadays? They would declare their a priori intellectual commitments. They would tell you, well, here's what I think. Here's where I'm coming from. I assume these things are true. And then they proceeded. And Jonathan Haidt says, we don't do that so much in colleges. Professors don't do that. And his point was, we ought to do that. We ought to say to students, we ought to. Yeah. And let me just say this. and you guys have been incredibly patient with me. Thank you. I want to wrap it up. I was at some one point in my classes, I do not manufacture it or plan it. At some one point, it will be revealed that I'm a person of faith, and I don't normally say that directly. That's not how it comes out. How it comes out in the discussion, and what I will do in the discussion is somebody will be making some point, valid point, I don't know what it is, and I'll say something that's absolutely correct. You're absolutely consistent and logically correct. However, I'll say, if you're a person of faith, you would not tend to see it that way. You might see it this way. As soon as I say that, the whole room lights up. The discussion is enlivened because half of the room has now been validated. They've just been told by this teacher, oh, you're saying that it's possible to see this from a position of faith. And I'm saying, yeah, it is. It's possible to see it that way.
It's interesting because on the left, the most sacred thing there is, and I'm using the word sacred on purpose here, is personal experience and personal perception. That's like the epistemology, lived experience at the moment. You need to be listening to people. You need to be listening to group X, Y, and Z very closely because they have an inherent viewpoint in the world that you do not. It just so happens that Christianity is not group X, Y, or Z at this moment.
How does that relate to what I was just saying, how it enlivens discussions?
Because it was more about the a priori knowledge of that we should look at where everybody's coming from in order to understand how we should have a conversation in class. And I think to a large extent we do that, and we've been doing it more than we ever have in the past. But I think you're right that religion has been dropped out of that group.
Yeah, I really wish that we would have taken something that Ryan said almost offhand and run with it. I almost interjected, but I liked where it was going. But I think this all boils down to what we think the university does, or what its job is, or what sorts of challenges it's supposed to face students with.
Yes.
And I agree with, I think it was Rule 8 or Suggestion 8 or whatever it was, that everybody ought to be forced to read the Bible and Shakespeare.
He didn't say force. He just said you should know them.
Well, okay, then I'll take it a step further. I think we should force students to read the Bible. we should force them to read the Bible, Shakespeare, Chaucer, and Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus. Those should be the only texts. It doesn't really matter where you take it afterwards. But if you want to understand, to use the term that's been thrown around a lot, the Western canon, you can't do it without those. No. But yeah, I think that to a large extent, the reason why theology isn't an overt, debate that's being had or something that permeates into the classroom is because it's. I don't think that most teachers are, enter the classroom with the mentality that, they want to ask students to evaluate their foundational first principles or their a priori presuppositions. I think maybe, we should get back to that, because I know that was, a practice of antiquity, but it's just not what most people are trained to do. I think any given college student who gets an MA and then goes back into the classroom isn't prepared to, talk about, anything within the Christian canon that's not St. Augustine, because they had to read it for a rhetoric class,
Right.
It's just not what people are trained to do. And I don't think that people who aren't trained to do that sort of thing, I don't think they should do it. And it's something of a niche specialty, because it's a delicate thing. I don't think there's anything more foundational than, the question of whether or not you're a theist, because I guess everything's downstream of theism or atheism to some extent.
Well, yeah, in a certain sense, that's true. I mean, it makes a difference on how you start out.
It does. Absolutely. I mean, I think that there is an obvious consequence to being a Wahhabist. That's the group I love to throw around, but I mean, it's true. Those beliefs carry with them consequences and a set of behaviors, and it's no surprise when people enact those behaviors, because they come from a text. So I would only want the best people to challenge our young minds with the headiest of heady ideas. And I think that's part of why, well, only a piece of why this isn't a more widespread topic or subject matter.
Parting words. I ask people this sometimes. Is there anything that you two guys? Is there anything that you want to say to my tribe, religious people, that you think you just want to say that maybe to think about? What would it be? It's your Jordan Peterson moment. You got 1 minute. Go.
One thing that comes up a lot with interacting atheists and religious people is there's this quote: "We're all atheists. We just believe in one less God than you." You already don't believe in a lot of gods, and so you know what that's like. And it turns out that most of us don't get too hung up on that. And if you're going to be in one of our classes, we don't really care because we have more common ground than we do differences. And I'll speak for myself. I'm not personally trying to indoctrinate anybody into anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Andrew?
I'm a libertarian, an intellectual libertarian. I don't care what anybody believes.
Okay, so you have no word. Then.
Get off my intellectual lawn. No. I mean, some of my favorite people are religious. I just don't happen to be religious, and both walks of lives are fine. I like having, well, this is, I guess, something of a newer thing. So, when I was younger, I was more, we'll just say militant. We can just say that. But now I really enjoy having these, foundational conversations. They were much more difficult for me to have. I was raised in a fairly, I'll say a fairly conservative Christian family. And so, coming out as an atheist was difficult. But it's fine now. And, the treatment that I received from my religious family, really informs the way that I feel today about, religious people. I have nothing but love for most people, we'll just say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So peace and love from your fellow neighborhood atheist.
From your postmodern neo-Marxist.
Yeah. We're also communists.
Yeah. And after our discussion today, I don't know how enlightening or just if it triggered some thoughts in you, would you, based on what we just talked about today and your just reflection on it, would you have a different word or a new word or any word at all to my secular friends? Is there something you would say to them, students or families or whoever it would be?
Don't be an asshole.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
It's generally
word for word.
I think that a lot of people can be assholes, but there's something that does ring true about the atheist asshole, about that kind of militant phase that we all go through. I've been through it. Andrew here has said he's been through it. And it looks a lot like it looks a lot like somebody who's trying to spread the word of God through annoying anger-filled means, right? It's not a good look for anybody. They would be a
secular fundamentalist.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as somebody who used to be like that, I wouldn't say fundamentalist, but maybe that's just wishful thinking. But I will say,
well, there's no unifying doctrine for atheists. It's just their thought on one claim.
Right. So, but what I will say is that a decade removed from being that way, you're going to look back on it and
Cringe.
Probably feel shame more than anything. So just stop while you're ahead. And it really comes off as though you're trying to prove something. And to some extent it is. You're trying to play out the idea. You're trying to perfect the apologetics to make sure that they're logically consistent. And so that's I think part of the reason why the attitude is so strident. But I'll guarantee you, you'll look back and it's not going to be fun.
It's funny because it's getting hung up on the most important question in the entire universe, but you realize that there are actually more important things that happen in your everyday life when you're interacting with these people. To a large extent, how you get along with the person next to you is kind of more important than whether or not there's a God.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think you guys have some wise words there, because I've certainly been an asshole in my life, and no, that's just the name of the game. That's it. And part of it's youth, and part of it is
testosterone.
Lots of that. So I think those are wise words. I think I could say that equally to religious folks too. Don't be an asshole. I hope you'll check out Andrew and Ryan's podcast, Seated in Action. If you heard something they said today that you disagree with or you agree with, they would love to hear from you. You can send them a message directly at seatedinaction@gmail.com, or you can go to their website, seatedinaction.com. And if you heard something that I said that you disagree with, well, okay, you can send me a message at stevezelt@gmail, or go to my website, asmallgoodthing.org. There is also an About tab that you can click on if you want to know a little bit more about me and my background. There's also a tab that keeps a running list of books that I'm reading, if that's of interest to you. Coming soon, if everything works like it's supposed to, I'm very excited to be talking with Greg Emilio. Greg was recently selected for this year's Best New Poets Anthology, and we'll be talking about the movie Patterson, starring Adam Driver. And, of course, we'll be talking about poetry. The music this time was by Kylo Kaz and Broke for Free, two talented guys whose work you can find referenced in the program notes. Thanks for listening.